So, Neon Genesis Evangelion. I'd be lying if I said this isn't one of my favorite shows ever. Not just favorite mechas, not just favorite animes, favorite shows. Now, if you're wondering if I like the films too, the answer is yes. However, today's not really meant to be a review. Evangelion, like Mobile Suit Gundam, is one of those shows I could easily create quite a bit of content around. I mean, we've already seen all the content I've created around Gundam. I could sit here and talk about the series proper, I could talk about the movies, I could talk about Shinji Ikari's psychology, I could talk about Asuka Langley's psychology, I could talk about Misato. Oh god, could I talk about Misato? Shit, I guess that's not happening. Okay, anyway, Evangelion's a series with a ton of layers to it. However, I wanted to talk about something very specific to Evangelion in regards to how it's presented and told as a story. The reason for this is completely focused around one word: deconstruction. So when it comes to literature, what exactly is deconstruction? Obviously, it's a word that gets tossed around a lot, to the point when it's thrown around so much that nobody really knows what the word even means. Sort of like how in modern culture, terms like woke or fascist get overused to the point where nobody knows what the hell they mean. The word woke gets thrown at a lot of things that honestly don't really fit the profile. And then, of course, any time that a military is portrayed in a somewhat positive light, somebody calls it fascist, but they have no clue what fascism actually is. Nor could they even spell it. So, in cases like this, we really need to go back to the definition of the word and start from there and branch out, sort of like starting a new save file in a video game. If we go to the Oxford Dictionary, deconstruction is defined as a method of critical analysis of philosophical and literary language, which emphasizes the internal workings and language and conceptual systems, the relational quality of meaning, and the assumptions implicit in forms of expression. Now here's the thing about the definition. Aside from having a lot of big words, what I can tell you is that there's layers to this in regards to metaphysics. A whole lot of philosophical mumbo-jumbo that talks about the essences of knowledge, the essences of communication, and so on and so forth. It can really be a really interesting read if you dive into it. This is all stuff I studied in college, by the way. But in the case of literature, it's something that I can actually break down to a basic statement, sort of a Reader's Digest version. Deconstruction in fiction is essentially breaking down a pre-existing genre or subgenre to pull it apart and critique or observe how it works. In doing so, you can use what you find and observe as an artist to create something completely new, using a similar foundation to the original, but now with your own spin on the subject at hand, while referencing the things that made the previous stuff tick. Now, deconstruction is something that comic book fans in the audience are probably going to groan about, and for good reason. Now, the most famous deconstruction within comic books ever is undoubtedly Alan Moore's Watchmen, and it's easily one of the greatest comic books ever, so it's understandable why it's in such high regard. The problem that you run into with Watchmen is that it seems like everyone and their dog who wrote comic books after it came out wanted to try and deconstruct the superhero medium like Alan Moore did, to varying effects. Warren Ellis, my favorite writer of all time, and probably my biggest inspiration, I feel did it successfully with his Superhuman trilogy, which includes the comics Black Summer, No Hero, and Supergod, in the sense of pulling it apart, critiquing it for what it is, and being a little bit more cynical about it, but also expressing something brand new with it, as opposed to just trashing on the genre. Now, Garth Ennis is also known for it, because The Boys takes similar ideas in regards to breaking down the superhero as a concept, and in that case turns it into a black comedy. By the way, read the comic on that one. There's probably a ton of YouTube videos that say that it just takes all of its time bagging on superheroes. That's not actually the point of the book. It's meant to be a black comedy. It's meant to just take the piss. If people are acting like this is basically giving a middle finger to all comic books ever, I'm sorry, you don't know anything about Garth Ennis. This is a guy who's actually written superheroes before, and some of them he's actually enjoyed writing. He's actually a pretty good Batman writer, and in his comic book called Hitman, he actually treated Superman with a lot of respect. Plus, he also had Kyle Rayner raped by Bueno Excelente, and I approve of that because Kyle Rayner sucks. That was a joke for legal reasons, that's a joke. By the way, I have a feeling somebody's going to say in the comments, Micah, how can you like the boys? Punisher and Preacher were better. Yes, I agree. Doesn't mean I can't like it. Calm down. Curb your autism. The problem that we see is that comic books afterwards got way too many deconstructions that honestly didn't really do anything that was very interesting aside from evil superhero or just saying that superheroes suck. Mark Miller, with as much respect as I have for him, is honestly the biggest culprit of this. At least, that's a talented writer. A lot of his work, in some places, just ended up being really edgy and, in my opinion, a waste of time. I feel like the most egregious example was Wanted. No, not the movie where we got to see Angelina Jolie's ass. I mean, the comic book. Which, when I actually got around to reading it, I ended up just hating every single character, and when it ended, the lead character told me to go fuck myself. So I told the book to go fuck itself and threw it in the trash. And then I felt bad about it because I like a lot of Mark Miller's work. I just hate his deconstructions. Because it's not really about building anything new. It's just about trashing things. And I honestly feel like it's kind of hollow because, unlike The Boys, I don't really think it's that funny either. So you might be asking yourself, what the hell does any of that have to do with Evangelion? Well, dear viewer, allow me to explain. But first, a word from our sponsor. And this video's sponsor is GRINDSTONE Arts. Yeah, it might be a little bit cheap for me to sponsor my own video, but at the end of the day, I have to say that I'm very proud of the things that my company is going to be able to provide for you guys in the coming years. So if you have not already, pre-orders are up for certain books that you are seeing, on top of mailing lists that are open as well if you want to be notified when more campaigns go live. Not to mention, it also goes without saying that we've got a great lineup of titles, a great lineup of creators, and we're looking forward to serving you in the future. So, if you like what you're seeing or you're interested in what you're seeing, don't forget to back our books, sign up for mailing lists, and also follow us on social media for all of the updates. Now, back to the video. To go over an earlier thought again, deconstruction is supposed to pull something apart and build something new on the foundation from observations of the original source. It's essentially supposed to be both what you saw and what you make from what you learned. You're observing the old and then creating something new and intriguing. If you're just picking something apart for the sake of picking it apart, you're not really making any sort of meaningful observation of the original concept. You're just autistically nitpicking things because you don't like it, and there's way too much of that on YouTube already. There's a reason that people still talk about Watchmen to this day, and they don't talk about something like Mark Miller's Nemesis all that much. Well, there is a Nemesis that gets talked about to this day, but it's the one from Resident Evil 3 because he's awesome. Point is that Evangelion is a deconstruction of a medium that looks to observe the medium that it's deconstructing and tries to make something new from it. Though it pulls the super robot genre apart, for example, or mecha in general, it honestly is also a love letter to it. And I really think that oftentimes the best deconstructions can be exactly that. But more on that later. I think that Evangelion succeeds quite well in what it's setting out to do, and I think that that's a big part of the reason as to why the series has become such a big force within the mecha subgenre, even though it doesn't have nearly as many iterations as something like the Holy Trinity of mecha in Gundam, Mazinger, and Getter Robo. At this point you might be asking yourself, Micah, what exactly is this deconstructing? Well, it's specifically deconstructing the super robot genre. For the uninitiated, I mentioned in my Dan Cougar review a while back that the Super Robot Show could best be summed up as superhero fiction, but instead of Superman, just put in a giant robot. I still don't think it's coincidental that the original Getter Robo design has similarities to Batman, or that a lot of super robots will have an insignia on their chest that's featured prominently in the same way that a lot of superheroes have them. Now, one thing I should mention is that I don't think that Evangelion's creator, Hideaki Anno, has any sort of negative feelings towards either Go Nagai or Ken Ishikawa, even though Evangelion is pulling apart a lot of what those two men did in Getter Robo and Mazinger Z. More so Mazinger Z than anything. Anno actually directed a live-action version of Go Nagai's Cutie Honey, and then the anime follow-up to that film called RE Cutie Honey. Not to mention he's gone on record saying he's a huge fan of Go Nagai and Ken Ishikawa. However, he's also said he's a massive fan of Mobile Suit Gundam creator Yoshiyuki Tamino, and it shows. In a lot of ways, Evangelion is sort of taking the works, and the works inspired by Go Nagai and Ken Ishikawa in the super robot genre, and looking at them through a Tamino lens. Evangelion is by no means a real robot show like Gundam. Not even close. If you want a show that's a perfect mix of real robot and super robot, go watch Dankuga. Go watch my review of Dankuga after you do that. It's linked at the end in a playlist. This show very much follows the same base premise of a super robot show. Young boy has to get into a robot to save the world. More often than not, it's going to be from an alien force or a mad scientist. In this particular case, the alien force is a seemingly otherworldly being called angels, and are named after angels in Judeo-Christian scripture and legends. By the way, if I ever do something long-form and in-depth on this series in the future, expect an entire section on the usage of religious iconography and how it works in favor of horror and the story. Either way, these things are going to destroy the world, so they have to be stopped. Now, we've got our setup for the episode-to-episode flow, and this is where Anno started asking questions that make for interesting fiction. First question: what kind of nut job is going to look at a giant monster like this and say, yeah, I want to get in that robot and fight a giant monster? I imagine some people will say, oh, I definitely would, and there's two responses to that. A, you're saying that easily, because you've never been in a violent or life or death scenario in your life. Or B, you have been around violence in your life, or just life and death scenarios, and you have a weird addiction to the excitement of those scenarios, meaning most people probably think that there's something very fucking wrong with you. So essentially, you're full of bullshit bravado, or you're a fucking loon by most people's estimations, which, admittedly, at one point in my life, I fell into the latter category. That's largely why Shinji Ikari's reactions in the very first episode of Evangelion are the way they are. Shinji Ikari already has psychological issues, but he's not a violent person, or someone that enjoys being near danger. He reacts to the situation like most people would whenever violence is around them. He's absolutely fucking terrified! This right here is how deconstruction is supposed to work. Anno isn't mocking or deriding the medium he's in with this. He's taking a situation and flipping the proverbial script by placing someone with a different personality in that spot. Anyone who has ever read Getter Robo can tell you that some of those pilots are a bit unhinged, to put it lightly. You could also say that the pilots of Mazinger Z and Great Mazinger, Koji Kabuto and Tetsuya Tsurugi, are just people who really enjoy fighting. If there is any criticism, it's of the TV version of those characters, or even shows that followed them, where you've got a 12-year-old boy being completely chill with the idea that there's a giant robot fighting other giant robots, and not thinking about the fact that he could easily get stepped on and turned into a human pancake. This actually starts a common theme throughout the entire story. All of the main characters are broken people at their core. Are some of them likable? Abso-fucking-lutely. I maintain that Misato Kitsurugi is one of the best characters in anime, well, ever. Funnily enough, she might be one of the maybe 3 people in the cast you'd probably want to be around if they were real. And not just because if she drinks enough, you're probably going to get lucky. Granted, I won't shame you if that's part of it. But enough of me being a dirty old man, I don't want Virgil to show up again. When you get to know Misato throughout the story, you find that she's got trauma and baggage, as does our main character Shinji and his fellow EVA pilots Rei and Asuka. And part of the fun is getting to watch all these broken, screwed up people interact with one another and try to save the world from an apocalypse scenario. Though this is a show that follows the Monster of the Week formula that most, if not all, super robot shows go through, there's just as much, if not more, focus on how absolutely fucked up everyone is as a person and what caused them to be this way. Alright, spoilers incoming, so let's go ahead and put one of our act guys in the corner so you guys know what's up. At the very end of it, Whether you're watching the end of the original series or the film The End of Evangelion, which, by the way, if you've watched the original series and you haven't watched End yet, you are missing out. It's a terrific horror film. But either way, you're getting a journey inside the mind, a la Altered States, with the last 2 episodes of the original series, or an apocalyptic horror with End of Evangelion. And honestly, I'm one of those people that doesn't say watch one or the other. I say watch both. Watch the 2 episodes that end Evangelion, the television series, and then watch the film End of Evangelion. End of Evangelion has a ton of action and a fuck ton of gore and horror with a really bittersweet ending. But one interpretation of the ending of the original series is that the last 2 episodes are there to show Shinji coming to the conclusion that he wants to remain an individual as opposed to becoming a part of the mass of LCL that the rest of humanity aside from himself and Asuka are. It's a really cool way of observing the ending of the whole thing. Now, all of this is a deconstruction, because there's not a happy ending here. There's not really any sort of positive, because one consideration that really doesn't get taken into account in a lot of super robot shows is the simple fact that the heroes might lose, or the people crazy enough to manufacture the giant killer robots, which, I mean, the Evangelion units are revealed to not actually be robots at all, are also crazy enough to try to start an apocalypse on their own terms just to be reunited with their dead wife. Gendo, you dumb son of a bitch. But that's what makes Evangelion an effective deconstruction. It's not trying to destroy what came before it or act like what came before it had no merit. It's not trying to insult the audience either. Rather, it's simply taking the elements that we're all familiar with and asking questions that, depending on the artist, could end up leading to different conclusions. In this particular case, we're seeing things through Hideaki Anno's very depressed lens in the original series. He ended up creating an anime that fits into a new subgenre that I would honestly like to see more of. Mecha horror. So far, the only examples I can of mecha delving into this are Better Man, Getter Robo Armageddon, Blue Gender, and Evangelion. Seriously, this is a great idea, and I don't understand why we don't see more of it. Anyway, you can see that we end up getting something new and unique that really only discredits the things it deconstructs to someone who's just being a cynical asshole and didn't like the mecha genre in the fucking first place. To those of us that aren't cynical and or autistic about such things, it's rather obvious that enjoying a super robot show that could be considered being criticized by Evangelion, like some of the Braves, for example, can also be enjoyed by people who enjoy EVA. The two aren't mutually exclusive, which is sort of how this thing should work. What I'm hoping for is that some people will start to take notes on these ideas if they're creatives, and realize that deconstruction is a good way to facilitate new ideas, not to be an intellectually bankrupt hipster trying to score head pats because they poke fun at whatever is stylish enough to be poked fun of at the time. Anyway, folks, if you enjoyed this video, one more time, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and if you want to help the financial elements of the channel, there are options to do so with Patreon and Subscribestar. Both links for that will be in the description. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Micah Curtis, your favorite vanilla gorilla, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.